Fair
All right,
enough.
so,
I'm sorry, I'll just end with one last comment, because you keep referring to this political issue of pegging winner and loser and having to deal with the hot potato. It just seems hypocritical that, as policymakers, to talk about our commitment to resolving income equality and providing affordable housing and the city's economic disparities while continuing to place the property tax burden on the backs of low-income renters. And I'll leave it at that.
okay, so I want to thank you very much. Would love to have you come up, I would say, after our February break.
Okay.
Can you do something, maybe, we'll try to, right after that, the last week in February or something like that, could we target that as a time? That we could have specifics, and maybe taking some area of the Bronx and so on, and kind of work it up as a pilot to see where we're going. I don't know whether, we need to do Queens or whatever, but might do some samples for us. I actually think all of this is good that you will do for us, because I think it is something that the city council should be actually requesting, and the mayor, as you're looking at where you're going next. So it is information that I think is really relevant. I'd like to introduce Lauren Dennison behind us, who is our analyst, and she'll probably make all the connect with you. So
Good.
we want to thank you very, very much. Look forward to meeting with you again.
Thank you.
In the capital of Albany. And again, what you're doing here, I listen to as a out-of-city resident, but it has a lot of implications to what we're doing around the state. So, and you're half the state, so it's important what you're doing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to ask the New York City Independent Office, George Sweeting, who's Deputy Director, if he would come up. And if anybody has after this one.
Okay.
We just got some information.
So that's what's really important, right? All right, so would you introduce yourself, both of you? There's another person.
Yes.
Okay, you're welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm George Sweeting. I'm Deputy Director of the Independent Budget Office, and I'm joined by...
I'm Jeffrey Profiter. I'm the property tax economist at the Independent Budget Office.
Very good, thank you very much.
Okay.
So if I know you have a statement, you can either read from it or just speak to the issues, whatever you would like to do.
I'll probably read from it, if that's okay with you. So thank you for the opportunity to testify. Over the years, our office has produced a number of reports and analyses that detail many of the disparities and the inefficiencies in the current system. All of these are available on our website. My testimony today will focus on what I think are the most important issues that merit Albany's attention or involvement. And these concern disparities among similar types of property, disparities between different types of property, and the lack of transparency for taxpayers. So a basic principle of tax policy is that similarly situated properties should be treated similarly. New York's assessment caps on 1, 2, and 3 family homes and small apartment buildings, and the requirement to use distorted market value estimates for co-op and condo buildings, which we've obviously heard a lot about already, guarantees that similar properties will face widely different tax burdens depending on where they are located in the city. Moreover, these differences vary systematically, so that neighborhoods with faster rates of appreciation tend to face lower tax burdens. These neighborhoods also tend to have higher value properties and higher average incomes, household incomes. For 1, 2, and 3 family houses, the city has set a target assessment ratio of 6% of market value. But many properties are assessed at a lower ratio, so that in 2016, the citywide median ratio is 5.1% of market value. This is because annual assessment increases are limited by state law to no more than 6% a year or 20% over 5 years, even when market values are increasing at a faster rate. Any year that market value growth exceeds 6%, the assessed value will grow by no more than 6%, thereby lowering the assessment ratio. Apartment buildings with 4 to 10 units also benefit from caps on annual increases. In this case, they're 8% in 1 year and 30% over 5 years. These caps were introduced to protect property owners whose ability to pay may not keep up with tax increases driven by rapid appreciation. But because neighborhoods experience different rates of appreciation over time, the caps result in wide disparities in tax burdens across neighborhoods. To facilitate comparisons of tax burdens between properties and neighborhoods, we measure effective tax rates, or ETRs, which are defined as the tax levy divided by the market value. And Michael Hyman's testimony, where he was talking about a lot of the numbers you see, the official numbers are really apples to oranges. This is an attempt to make it apples to apples using estimates that our office has derived. In the case of co-ops and condos, we use a sales-based market value estimate rather than the official Department of Finance value, which is constrained by the Section 581 of the Real Property Tax Law. The city median ETR for 1, 2, and 3 family properties is 92 cents per every $100 of market value based on the 2016 assessment roll. But when you look at individual neighborhoods, we see that places such as Park Slope in Brooklyn, which has seen steady appreciation for more than 20 years, the median ETR is 30 cents for every $100 in market value, less than 1/3 of the citywide median. Just a few miles away in Canarsie, the median ETR is 3.7 times higher at $1.09 for every $100 in value. This means the owner of a $500,000 house in Park Slope, and I know it's hard to find them, would pay about $1,241, while the owner of a $500,000 house in Canarsie would pay about $5,460. The attached map at the back of the statement shows the variation in neighborhood median ETRs across the city. In addition to producing such wide disparities, assessment caps are an inefficient means of protecting existing homeowners from unaffordable tax increases. Instead of only targeting those homeowners who actually need assistance, the caps benefit all owners in areas experiencing rapid appreciation. Moreover, barring a major collapse in home prices in the city, apartments in such areas will not reach the target assessment ratio for many years, which means new owners moving into gentrifying neighborhoods also enjoy the benefit of a lower ETR than homeowners in other parts of the city. Another byproduct of the assessment caps is erosion of the city's property tax base, because the caps will continue to suppress assessments relative to market value growth when growth exceeds 6%. Assuming the city looks to generate the same amount of revenue, tax rates are higher than they would have to be in the absence of caps, meaning owners of uncapped properties pay more. Effective tax rates for co-ops and condos also vary widely across the city, as the city is compelled by state law to value these properties as if they were income-producing buildings. You heard a lot about this already. In many cases, especially for co-ops in parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn, the available comparables often include one or more rent-regulated buildings with constrained rent rolls. In the case of newer luxury condos, there are almost no rental buildings that are truly comparable. Once comparable buildings are identified, the per square foot net income is then imputed to the co-op or condo building. Because co-ops and condos generally have higher valued finishes and amenities than rental properties, this usually results in official market values that discount sales-based market values. IBO estimates that citywide, the discount, which we refer to as the 581 discount, for condos is about 82%. For co-ops, it is around 77%. In other words, only 18% of the market value of condos is included in the tax base. While virtually all co-ops and condos benefit somewhat from this legally required discounting, the extent of the discount varies. The following table in my testimony shows those neighborhoods with the largest and smallest average market value discounts for condos. The greater the discount, the lower the effective tax rate. As a result, apartments with similar selling prices can end up paying very different taxes. I've included a list of the neighborhoods with the 10 neighborhoods with the largest discounts. They're largely in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I've included the neighborhoods with the 10 neighborhoods with the lowest discounts. Those are mostly in the Bronx and Queens. The requirement to use imputed income rather than sales price for apartments removes roughly $300 billion from the property tax base. If these dollars were instead included in the base, the overall tax rate could be reduced, although not without some redistribution of tax burdens. Another issue is disparities between property types. Unlike the rest of New York State, where the law calls for uniform assessment across all types of property, New York City and Nassau County classify property by use, and uniformity is only required within the classes. Although classification and disparate treatment between classes is not uncommon in property tax administration, the size of the differences in effective tax rates that result between property types in New York City is quite large. The city, which has the discretion to set the assessment ratio, uses 45% for commercial property in Class 4, utility property in Class 3, and apartment buildings, including co-ops and condos in Class 2, while, as I mentioned earlier, the target assessment ratio in Class 1 is only 6%, and many of those are actually below 6%. As a result, Class 1 accounts for a much lower share of the taxable assessed value than its share of market value, while the other classes contribute a disproportionately higher share of taxable assessed value relative to their market value share. The disparity in tax treatment that results is made worse by an arcane process for setting the tax rates for each class, a process that seeks to preserve each class's share of the levy as it stood in 1989. Only minor annual adjustments are allowed to account for changing shares of market value, and Class 1 has accounted for the largest share of market value growth since 1989, but in most years since the early 1990s, the legislature has acceded to the city's request to limit even these small potential adjustments in order to hold down the tax burden on homeowners, leaving more of the burden to fall on the other classes. And I can answer questions about the table. The table above compares the shares of assessed value and market value and average effective tax rates for the 4 tax classes, as well as for some of the specific property types in Class 2. The data are from the 2015 assessment roll, with all market values adjusted to account for the required 581 discounting of co-op and condo properties. Class 1 accounts for 30.5% of the market value. This is our estimate of the share of our estimate of market value after adjusting for the treatment of co-ops and condos, but only 9.3% of the assessed value subject to taxation. The share of the levy borne by 1, 2, and 3 family homeowners is also well below their share of market value. By comparison, commercial properties in Class 4 account for 22.1% of the market value, but because they have about 50% of the taxable assessments, their owners pay 43.1% of the levy. Within Class 2, rental properties also pay higher shares of the levy than their shares of the market values. When we look at it in effective tax rate terms, we can see that Class 1 owners and co-op and condo owners face the lowest average tax burdens measured with IBO's estimated market values, 77 cents per 100 of market value. Class 4 has an average effective tax rate of $3.18, more than 4 times higher than the Class 1 effective tax rate. Class 3 utility property is taxed even more heavily at an average of $4.83 per 100. However, much of the property tax paid by regulated utility companies, as was noted earlier, is ultimately passed on to consumers through higher prices. The highest effective tax rates are faced by owners of rental, elevator, and walk-up properties in Class 2, with average ETRs that are 4.7 and 5.8 times higher than those paid by Class 1 owners, respectively. Although landlords bear the legal incidence of the tax, economic theory suggests that at least a portion of the property tax flows through to tenants in the form of higher rents, with the apportionment depending on market conditions and to some extent regulatory conditions. But because tenants don't receive a property tax bill, they are generally unaware that they are paying a piece of the landlord's property tax in their rent. And in the city's property tax system, the part of the tax burden their rent helps to pay is disproportionately high compared to the burden on people who own their homes. While the low effective tax rates for houses and co-op and condo apartments help attract and keep homeowners in the city, the much higher effective tax rates on rental and commercial property raise the cost of developing these properties. In recent decades, the city has offered tax incentives to spur commercial and apartment development, in part to help offset these properties' high tax burdens. An alternative approach to relying on tax incentives would be to bring more of the value of residential property into the tax base, which would allow for a reduction in the overall tax rate and remove some of the pressure to offer incentives. A final issue that merits attention is the opaqueness of the city's property tax. It is so complex with its multiple assessment methods, as we've witnessed earlier here, assessment caps on small properties, transitional assessments in classes 2 and 4, multiple exemptions and abatements, and the class share system for apportioning the levy, that it is virtually impossible for the typical taxpayer to understand how her tax bill was determined, or to understand how her assessment compares with a neighbor's. Even those of us who work at it for a living have a hard time following all the moving pieces. Yet the property tax should be a relatively easy tax for citizens to understand, at least in theory. Some complexity is inevitable, particularly if there is a goal of mitigating the effect of rapid appreciation on tax bills for those with fixed or low incomes. But such protection can be provided more directly and explicitly via credits or abatements than by the blunt force of assessment caps. So what is to be done? IBO does not make specific policy recommendations, and I will not do so today, but I can make one general point. Over the years since the current system was established in 1981, there have been a series of piecemeal changes to address specific problems with the property tax system. In many cases, these Band-Aids, however well-intentioned, have created or exacerbated other problems in the system. The best example is probably the co-op condo abatement, which aimed to bring co-op and condo tax burdens more in line with the burdens on homeowners. But because the abatement didn't change the underlying assessments, the effect was to widen disparities within the co-op and condo class. This suggests that fixing a property tax system that virtually all owners think doesn't work for them requires a comprehensive overhaul rather than piecemeal tinkering with all elements of the system put on the table. So thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and be happy to try to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetie. Let me ask you something. As the Independent Budget Office, you are the Independent Budget Office for the City Council or the mayor, or both?
Neither.
Neither.
We're independent of both the executive and the legislative. We are a city agency. We take requests for research and analysis from elected officials, which is largely members of the city council or the borough presidents. But we are not formally part of either one of those branches.
So why would you not be able to make a presentation of what you think needs to be done in this area and provide that to those elected officials in the city? Have they requested such a thing?
No one has requested that specific thing. I mean, as a general rule, we view our role as providing information to decision makers, and then it's up to those people to take that information and formulate policies to, to deal with the questions that they asked.
Mm-hmm. Have they asked about the assessing taxation issue at all? Any of them in the last 5 years? I don't know how long you've been there, but.
we've been here since 1996. We've done a lot of work on the property tax. We have published a number of studies. We've answered some specific questions, but no one has asked us for a particular set of recommendations.
Maybe it's time to do that. You suggested with the co-op condo that there was a loss of $300 billion potentially in assessed valuation.
Well,
and
market value.
Market value, right. So how would you, I mean, I guess the problem is if you were to make any changes in any of these categories, how do you do it? Can you do it wholesale just like this, or do you have to do steps so that it changes over X number of years and so on, so people aren't hit? Or do you grandfather people in on the co-op condo situation, grandfather the people that are there now, but anything new coming in would be different? How would you go about making the shift in policy?
I mean, I think any shift that really addressed all of these issues would be so significant that it would not be realistic to do it just in one night,
Right.
switch from one system to another system. So almost certainly there has to be some type of transition. Exactly, is it better to grandfather people or have a 5-year phase-in? Or I think that would be the kind of thing you'd look at after you decided where you wanted it to ultimately get to, and then you could think about what's the least disruptive way of getting there, and the path might depend on where you're ultimately trying to get.
Dan?
Sure.
Thank you. Wanted to just talk briefly about the sort of money left on the table, the money that the city of New York is not getting from the property tax system that it could or it ought to. And on the second page of your testimony, you talked, in addition to providing such wide disparities, assessment caps are an inefficient means of protecting existing homeowners. Can you describe a little more in detail why you wrote that and why you think that is?
Well, the widely accepted reason why you have these caps is you want to protect homeowners from very rapid appreciation in property values that would ultimately translate into higher taxes. Because not everybody is, just because their property value goes up doesn't mean their incomes have gone up and their ability to pay has gone up. However, if you use an assessment cap, which slows the rate of assessed value growth for across the system, you're benefiting a lot of people whose incomes might very well be able, the ability to pay may very well be keeping up or keeping up closer to the appreciation. So if your goal is to protect particular households, households on fixed incomes, low-income people that own homes already, there are ways of doing that either through circuit breakers, you could look at some types of exemptions. Some places have developed these systems where you basically defer the increase and it sort of builds up on account, and then when a sale occurs, you make the adjustment at that point. So there are a number of ways of dealing with it. All of that is more targeted than what we currently do under the S7000 structure with these broad-based assessment caps.
You talked about to the benefit, whether it's existing co-op and condominium owners who get the benefit of the abatement, or whether it's Class 1 who have the caps. How does this affect, talking about who's getting benefit and to the benefit of whom, do you have a view on if, let's say you're a single-family homeowner within year 2 of the 5-year increase and you're paying gradually, how does that affect the market in terms of sales for a whole sales market coming in and people wanting to purchase that property? Do you think, in your view, if you can answer this, is that a group of people who deserve the benefit of a capped or abatement system? People coming to purchase these properties, do they deserve this quote-unquote protection?
Well, I think you have to go back to why you think the cap is necessary. If you think the cap is there to protect people whose incomes aren't keeping up or are on fixed income, by definition, those are not the people who are the new people coming in and buying. So if that's your goal with the cap, then the cap is not, is doing more than it needs to do, because it's benefiting the next owner, who may very well is much more likely to be able to afford the higher taxes that would go with a higher value.
And when that new owner comes in, he or she, they get the existing benefit of the tax model that's on the place. They don't start anew with a new market-based, is that correct?
That's correct. It's all, none of that changes at sale.
Using your sales-based market value estimate of co-ops and condominiums, what would be, or what is the can you estimate what is the market share for Class 2 property?
Well, if you look in the table, the comparison table, the overall Class 2 share of market value, we estimate, is about 45%. That's in the column labeled share of market value.
Which 0.4?
Under, right?
Yeah.
Is 45%
Third column
right?
to the
Your
right.
third column, second down.
Yeah.
Again, these are our estimates of market value, making
Yeah, there it is.
valuing co-ops and condos by sales price rather than the way the city is forced to do under the law to value them as income producing.
As brought up by prior speakers and questions here, is the IBO offer, I know yours is, you're tasked with looking and evaluating disparities and not making opinions or suggestions on the fix, but it's been brought up on the here in this panel and in testimony earlier today about theoretically what a new system would look like. One such suggestion was having simply a residential class and a commercial class and fixing their market share in some proportionate way. Can you offer any, without saying you love it, you hate it, can you offer some sort of opinion on that suggestion?
I mean, it's one common outcome. I mean, there's a model that says you have everybody treated uniformly and they're all in one class, but there are certainly places that at least distinguish between commercial and residential. I think one of the challenges, and I believe that this was also part of the discussion back in when S7000 was originally enacted, is again, what do you do with the co-ops and condos? Do you treat them as apartment buildings or do you treat them as home ownership? And this is less of a problem than it was several decades ago, but particularly with co-ops that were undergoing conversions from rental, you had many buildings where you had a mix in the building of co-ops and condos.
But
I'm sorry, co-ops and rentals.
That's less of a problem.
That's diminished. That would presumably make it easier to move all of them in with a residential class. I think one of the considerations, if you were doing that in a way that's revenue neutral, you would probably wind up raising, and then treating everyone in that class the same, you would probably wind up increasing the tax burden on Class 1 properties, depending on market conditions. But